Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. One of the primary functions of the state is to ensure and provide security to its citizens, for which it builds relevant institutions, and one of those institutions in order to thwart any external threats is the armed forces. Armed forces gain that very strength from the support of the people they protect, and that particular strength keeps their morale high to deal with any threat at any given particular time. Armed forces are the guardians of the national security. Pakistan, since its inception, has been faced with multiple challenges and threats from the external side to its national security, to which Pakistan armed forces have been dealing with very professionally. When we specifically talk about India on the eastern side, and also the volatility and unstable Afghanistan on the western side, Pakistani armed forces have also been able to break the backbone of the terrorism during war on terror. Now, specifically when we talk about the Kabul takeover back in 2021 by the Afghan Taliban, Pakistan has once again witnessed the resurgence of terrorism, and Pakistani authorities have decided to launch Vision Azme Istehkam, resolve to stability, in order to eliminate the remnants of terrorism with re-energized and reinvigorated intelligence-based operations. Amid all this, there are certain elements which are involved and have resorted to a terrorism of their own kind. Digital terrorism, which has been termed as such by Director General Inter-Services Public Relations, Lt.Gen. Ahmed Sharif, and he has also termed this particular criticism and also the narrative against the armed forces and its leadership as digital terrorism. What he had to say during an important presser with the media yesterday, let me bring in some important excerpts of those statements. Digital terrorists were using tools such as cell phones, computers, falsehood and propaganda to impose their will on society, just like regular terrorists do. Instead of the courts and regulations moving forward against them, they are given further space and they are made heroes in the name of freedom of expression. Now this particular unquote. Now this particular freedom of expression that we get to hear so frequently about. Let me bring in that article from the Constitution of Pakistan that specifically talks about freedom of speech and expression. Article 19, every citizen shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, and there shall be freedom of press subject to any reasonable restrictions imposed by the law in the interest of the glory of Islam or the integrity, security or defense of Pakistan or any part thereof. Friendly relations with the foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, commission of or incitement to an offense. When we talk about the functioning of the broadcast industry, the media industry, there are certain regulations. When we talk about Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, we saw an amendment back in 2023 happening as to the definition of disinformation. What that disinformation's definition is: verifiable, false, misleading, manipulated, created or fabricated information which is disseminated or shared with the intention to cause harm to the reputation of or to harass any person for political, personal or financial interest or gains without making an effort to get other person's point of view or not giving it proper coverage and space, but does not include misinformation, unquote. In today's program, we'll try to take the analysis as to what these elements are actually involved in, why they are resorting to digital terrorism as termed by DGISPR, what is the objective behind this particular digital terrorism, what sort of tools they are using, what sort of implications this particular digital terrorism has on the national security. Are there any mechanisms to hold these elements accountable? And when we talk about what are the relevant laws, the provisions in the law in order to hold them accountable. For that, we are honored to have been joined on Skype by Lt.Gen retired Raza Mohammad Khan, senior analyst. General Raza Mohammad Khan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Let's begin with this particular term that we get to hear often about, the fifth gen war or the fifth generation war. What does that basically imply? Why is it called the fifth generation war? Could you please shed a little bit of light regarding this particular phenomenon?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
To answer your question, I think we have been hearing about fourth generation and fifth generation warfare and digital warfare. It's actually a combination of low intensity operations, mainly in the political, psychosocial, digital, financial, and other domains. But I would like to, and it's the subject that we are talking about is part of the 5G warfare. We are aware, that Pakistan is confronting various kinds of terrorism. One of the conventional terrorists, and you talked about the digital terrorists. There are the religious bigots and terrorists. And then there is a category which is actually a combination of all three. So you have to fight against all these four categories for the simple reason that their purpose is the same, and that is to impose their will upon the government and upon the people of Pakistan. Whether that will is political in nature, whether it is religious in nature, or whether it has some other designs. So all these terrorists, I think, have to be defeated and they have to be punished. But actually the digital terrorists are posing the biggest threat to the national security of Pakistan because they're trying to diminish, and alter the senses of the people of Pakistan to differentiate what is right and what is wrong. And they're affecting their thought process, and they're trying to hijack their minds for their own philosophy, particularly, their political sort of leaning and philosophy. I think that is something very serious. They have to be, the people of Pakistan, particularly the formative minds of the youth of Pakistan, have to be defended against them by all means. For that, I think the government of Pakistan need to take all possible measures, including budgeting and funding the retaliatory and the counter actions for that. And they also have to be deterred, as you made a mention.
Over here, General Khan, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Before we head towards that particular understanding of what exactly the measures that are required to be brought in by the authorities in order to counter this particular thing, I would like to bring in that particular case of EU Disinfo Lab reports that it has been giving reports since 2019. So a non-profit organization in the European Union busted that campaign of India, in which there were fake news outlets, the fake think tanks, fake experts were being quoted, and those news stories were being given to Indian news agency ANI to malign Pakistan and China on the international level. So that particular onslaught by the Indian side also comes under the ambit of that 5G war. So when we try to identify these elements which have been described in yesterday's press by DGISPR that are involved in digital terrorism, how do you differentiate between Indian onslaught on Pakistan, through that disinformation campaign, and these elements who are involved in this disinformation campaign from within Pakistan? What are the commonalities?
Okay, so the commonalities are that I described four kinds of terrorism, and digital terrorism is one of them. I think they all have their masterminds, first of all, and they have their planners, and these planners are both foreigners. The planning is done from abroad, and there are domestic planners as well. They have their local kind of commanders for this purpose. They have their financiers, both foreign as well as locals. They have their logistic providers. Then they have their sympathizers within Pakistan, and they have their data or information or intelligence providers. So these are all the common factors of all these kinds of terrorism, and one has to actually trace all of them and take appropriate action against them, particularly those who are the masterminds, whether they are sitting in Pakistan or they are sitting abroad or they are someone else. You made a mention, of the digital terrorists trying to take advantage of a constitutional provision, and you also very rightly pointed out, that that constitutional provision has very clearly said that it does not apply when the national security or the institutional security or fame is involved. And unfortunately, these terrorists, they try and misuse the law through legal measures. And I think I agree with what was said by the DGISPR, that sometimes the main media and the social media itself try to project them as heroes, and they try sometimes to project them as somebody whose human rights have been violated, not considering the fact that those people are violating the human rights and the national security of the whole nation. So I think very stern action needs to be taken against all of them, both legal as well as other actions. And I will very quickly make a mention of the PACA ordinance, which needs to be appropriately amended, and it needs to be done as soon as possible, because that is a very urgent sort of a step to be taken. Social media platforms, they must have their offices here in the big cities, so that they can be made.
It should be properly amended. I seek your pardon, General Khan. I'll come back to you to take your understanding as to what could be the manifestation of those actions, including both legal and other actions when it comes to the authorities dealing with this particular threat to the national security. For now, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Shabana Fayyaz, security analyst. Dr. Shabana, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let's talk about this particular lofty ideal of freedom of expression and speech. I've already mentioned what the Article 19 says, with certain restrictions as to what freedom of speech and expression is. We talk specifically of yesterday's presser by DGISPR. Let me quote that very important statement. Instead of the courts and the regulations moving forward against them, the people who are involved in digital terrorism, they are given further space and they are made heroes in the name of freedom of expression. So this particular freedom of expression, is it an absolute right, or is it actually has some certain restrictions which must be followed? What's your understanding?
Well, very, very complicated question, I must say. The whole gambit of the conversations that's been going on social media and offline by our security stalwarts is very critical to note for the analyst purpose. Freedom of speech is what's enshrined in our constitution to begin with, and to quote the Qaeda-e-Azam, you're free to go, you're free to speak and everything. but the question is how and when and where. This is very important. And I think that there are a lot of, as has been mentioned earlier by the analyst as well, there has been a whole stream of the legislations being carried out, and also by the military injunctions during the General Zia rule, and also during the Musharraf rule as well, General Musharraf, that how and where to, what is the limit. Now, interestingly or critically, what has happened since the last 15 years or so is that on one side we are living in a connected world. Pakistan is a part of interconnection, social media plays a vital role. On the other hand, we have a whole regime of cyber laws. We have the ministries, we have the special commissions, but there is a total mismatch. The idea of realization by any forces, whether it is political opponents, whether it is the small groups, whether it is the radical, it has not been digested. Why? Because there is a lack of cyber literacy in our country. And I think this is the major factor, that at times it is very difficult for an outsider, those like diaspora living outside, you know, you don't know where, as I travel, I find them totally polarized. You don't know what they are asking and what they are listening, because it is your own very channels that are showing what's been done. So, it is not only one, the social media, it is other streams of the social media as well that I think has to be controlled. So, in that the freedom of expression has become a very fuzzy concept. You can tailor it the way you want, and but the state, ultimately the state has to ensure the integrity of the nation, and for that this people and the state have to go together. And I really believe that the laws are being made, but there is no use of the laws if it is not people friendly laws, if the people don't want that laws. So, I think this is a weak point in our case.
Right. So, how concerning do you think is when DGISPR talks about those people who are involved in that propaganda, they have the vested interest, when specifically talk about the criticism regarding the recently decided vision Azmat-e-Istehkam, it's the entity is talked about in question was receiving a lot of money, and they are involved in this particular criticism not on the basis of any ideology, but rather for the sake of a lot of money. How concerning is that?
You know, I think we have to look back as well what's been going on in the minds of the opponent parties. Before 9th of May, there was a whole series of the political, you know, wrestling that was going on in Pakistan and instability. Under that point, and even before that, we all know the political polarization has made the nation a victim of its own circumstances. So, in that some cases, the, you know, this whole narrative that the army was being targeted was one of the very, very critical happening, and unfortunately a very bad thing to happen, because it is at times you can fix its ropes to the outsider propaganda. I am not saying that any party is attached to the externals or antagonistic. I think that will be a too flagrant, you know, thing to say, but the narrative of maligning an institution is something that has been gaining momentum by the polarized vision of the leadership. And it is not only the ones who are outside, it is at times who are on the fringes as well, and also on the times of the different communities within Pakistan. Why? Because again I will say, this is the, you know, the mileage and the how the people have, there was another story that you find the church in the you know, the convoys truck. So, what is this? It is the image, trying to malign the image. So, it's been going, and regarding
that very particular approach of maligning a certain institution that is guardian of the national security, what sort of implication does this particular approach or building such a narrative against such an important institution has on overall national security of the country?
I think it is already has tainted the image of country outside. It is trying to, you know, still most of the majority, rather whole of the world say the constitution is upheld by the forces. Second is the there is no question that who is most integrated institution in Pakistan, and that is the one. And we all know that this whole notion has given is going to have a very, very negative consequences, and it will only give space to those who don't want Pakistan to be together.
Right. General Raza, this particular question, when we talk about that important presser of DGI-SPR, talking of that particular entity with the vested interest involved in that unwarranted criticism of that particular vision, Azme-Istehkam, the way they are portraying it, it's not based on any ideology, rather for the sake of lots of money. How concerning that is?
Well, I think that propaganda is actually, as I've been saying, it is based on Goebbels' theories, that you tell a lie and you repeat it constantly. And once you do that, then it will be taken as the truth. But, how do you defend against that? Because I'm aware, that when you look at the 20 points of the National Action Plans, then, defense and deterrence against digital terrorists is not there. So as a first step, I think that should be included there. Right now, when you're talking of defense against digital terrorism, and particularly if it is political terrorism, then I think it is the responsibility of the political parties themselves to counter the fake narratives and the poisonous narratives against state institutions, whether it is the armed forces or the judiciary or the other. So that is the defensive measures, I think, which needs to be included. In addition to the media itself, who needs to realize that unless that narrative is countered, I think there is going to be division inside the country, division amongst the people within our society, even inside the families. And then there has to be, deterrence against that. And when you talk of deterrence, I think there has to be clear laws made against this. And once again, I'd like to make a mention that the social media platform needs to have their offices here so that they can be made accountable. And if they don't, then obviously the government of Pakistan has no other option but to put a temporary ban on them. And I think it did so in the form of putting a ban on X because they were not responding to the concerns of the government of Pakistan against the national security. And when I say this, I think this is happening in other countries of the world, particularly in India, in China, and even in the United States. It is happening there. When it comes to dangers to their national security, then I think these platforms, they are made accountable. Many a time, even in the EU, they have been heavily fined for this kind of negligence. So that needs to be done. And of course, there is also in this that culture of, on WhatsApp that forwarded as received, that echo chamber needs to be changed through education of the people, through the academia, through the media, and through the civil society. And this weaponization of social media by some elements is a very, very serious thing. And I think the earlier the government of Pakistan takes a decision on this, I think the better it would be.
General Khan, I'll come back to you regarding as to this particular awareness among the masses. What sort of measures can be taken in that particular regard? For now, we are honored to have been joined on the phone by another participant, Mr. Azmat. He is Advocate, Supreme Court, legal expert. Mr. Azmat, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. When we talk about this freedom of expression and freedom of speech, we all know what the constitutional provision talks about it. Your understanding as to when it comes to freedom of speech and freedom of expression, where are the red lines when we talk about the use of social media by the general masses, where that line comes when they must be made aware that it's not an absolute right?
You're absolutely correct. Number one, the freedom of expression is not an unfettered right in which, in fact, around the world, it's not an unfettered right in which you can say what you want. There are reasonable restrictions on it. Our Article 19 of the Constitution also places these restrictions on the freedom of expression itself. Furthermore, there are defamatory laws in the country which also places this restriction. But the problem right now and the topic under consideration is that although the media that you're operating, you're regulated by PEMRA. But unfortunately, social media is not even regulated by PEMRA. There are no specific laws under which we can place regulations. That is why it is a field in which there is hardly any regulation, and people are free to say whatever, defame whoever, and make and give whatever views without and at times being anonymous and not stating their identity. The first thing that probably needs to be done is that, like the mainstream media,
Your
social
pardon,
media
to hold you
also.
for a second over here. What about the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act 2016? D-
Yes,
What does
the
that particular act deal with?
The PICA law is there, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, but as you've seen, that it has been largely been ineffective uh, for the reason that there has been no deterrence. There has been the courts have not come, the investigating agencies first, and then the courts have not come down hard. Every time somebody has said something, 99.99% of the time they've gotten away with it. So the first thing that needs to be done is there has to be some sort of a deterrent factor of the law. If people know that they won't be prosecuted and they will not be punished for whatever they say, it keeps on piling up. So we need to first have a very strong enforcement deterrent mechanism in order for these laws to be effective.
Right. So this strong enforcement mechanism, the deterrence mechanism, what could be the contours of that? What's required for that?
Uh, for me, if you ask me as a lawyer, I would say that our defamation law has been the most ineffective law amongst many other ineffective laws in the country. If you, the same people, when they're abroad, they're very careful in what they're saying. But when they are here, they see over the past at least 10 years, I've not seen a good judgment on defamation coming out from our courts in which somebody has said something really defamatory, in which they have lowered the others in the estimation of us. They've been lowered in the estimation of others, but nothing has happened. However, recently the government of Punjab has done a good job. They've come up with a good law on defamation, but unfortunately, as of today, even that law is not fully functional because there are tribunals that had to be made under that law, which have not been constituted as yet. So, unless somebody who says something defamatory or something which is against the law of the country, and he's not prosecuted, they will keep on saying it and it will keep on piling up. As of today, people have a clean sheet to do whatever they want. But that's not the case around the world. That is a particular case in lesser developed countries, especially so in Pakistan, which needs to be looked into. The same people, as I've said, are not saying these stuff when they're out of the country, but they're doing it when they are within Pakistan with impunity.
Right, Mr. Azmat, you just talked of that recently, uh, uh, that particular law of defamation regarding Punjab province. There was certain criticism to that also from certain quarters. You consider that a good law. So why that criticism was there at the very
Uh,
first
I,
place?
I'll tell you why. The people who are criticizing have not even probably read the law. What does the law say, the new defamation law? It says if you make a truthful statement, that is fine. But if you make a defamatory statement, then the process will be not a long, drawn civil trial spanning over years. Then it will be a very quick process. Anybody who defames another person without any proof of loss and damages, if you just prove that that the statement was untrue about another person and he's been defamed, you straight away pay 3 million. If you if you prove that that defamatory statement was intentional and was with a malicious intent to harm that other person's reputation, then that 3 million is multiplied with 10. That is called special damages. So that otherwise the law is the same. All that law has done is make the process very quick, and it has covered the social media in it. That is about it. If you are not making a defamatory statement, or if you're making a true comment, and if you're making even a fair comment on any judgment of the Supreme Court, you're free to go. The law says if you make a defamatory statement against a constitutional office holder, the case will straight away start at the High Court level. So there is nothing wrong in the substance of the law. Maybe some people might perceive that law might be used in a negative sense, but that's not the case with the law. The letter of the law is very good.
Right. One last important point. This particular term that has been used by DGISPR in his yesterday's presser, digital terrorism. When we talk about PICA 2016, there is a section 10 of it that talks about cyber terrorism. There are certain subsections to it. So can we say that this particular section 10 of PICA 2016, cyber terrorism, is synonymous to that particular term which has been used by DGISPR, digital terrorism, or are there any differences? Mr. Azmat, can you hear me, please? I think unfortunately we've lost the connection with Mr. Haris Azmat, Advocate, Supreme Court, joining us on the phone line. Dr. Shabana, now what's your understanding as to, you heard Mr. Haris Azmat talking about as to there should be a strong enforcement deterrence mechanism for these particular laws in order to have that particular control. Your understanding, what are the stumbling blocks regarding the implementation of these laws?
First is, I think the most important is that the lack of capacity and the lack of training, because, and the second is the overcrowded judiciary. I think this is where the training is less comparative. You know, the laws are made in haste, and also they are not, unfortunately, some of the judicial and the others are not updated on regular basis. I am not saying all. And then the overcrowdedness. We all know, although we have the ADR as well going on side by side, but on the specifically regarding the cyberspace and others, we have the FIA that deals with it. We have the cyber wings as well. But either the cases take very long. Why they take long? There is a lack of evidence, number one. Number two, it is that the process of fetching the evidence is very slow, or it is delayed by choice or deliberately. And most importantly, I feel the laws have not been successful in our case. We all know the parties who were given and being banned on the basis of their language, and right now also doing demonstrations, but they were all given because of the hate speech and others, and they were given a clean chit. The problem is we have a selective rule of law, and when the people know that they can get away with it, whether they are rich or poor or whatever, they will try. So the confidence of the citizen in understanding or enforcement of the law, I think this is a major stumbling block in our case.
So there are laws, the authorities have to formulate laws, the legislation happens, so then those laws have to be implemented, and during the process the proper investigation should be done. So when it comes from that particular point of legislation until its enforcement or implementation, where do you see the role of the judiciary in the implementation of that?
Judiciary is not to go and enforce the law. Judiciary is to make the decision in the light of the law and looking into the evidence that is presented. Like it is, police is not supposed to decide, they have to present evidence in there, and advocates are those. Enforcement depends upon the administrative branches of the state. Okay. And that is most important. That's where, and in that administrative branches, some of the other organs are involved. So that is the pilferage that occurs. But again, I tell you, if there is a confidence, lack of confidence, and somehow sort of a double vision, regarding something, so the people can get away with it. There is a one stream that is a social media that is going on. There is an other stream that is using the things that are banned on the social media through the other instruments. So that needs to be checked properly.
So what is the responsibility of the academia, scholars and the educational institutions when it comes to spreading that awareness among the general masses about social media literacy or the digital platforms, how to use them appropriately?
This is something very important. We at the university, at the Qaid-e-Azam as well, have taken an initiative into the cyber literacy. Myself has also been involved into the cyber bullying brainstorming session by the Ministry of Education and Wafaq Muhtasib as well. So it is specifically regarding the counter radicalization and CV, it is very much there. It remains a very well, like NECTA is doing a lot of things on that. We have the regular conferences, journals and things. But again, it is a very slow process, It is a generational process. And I think to make that overnight, the people will start and switch it, it is very difficult.
Right. General Khan, when we talk about the national security policy that was presented back in 2022 until 26, it took the holistic view of the national security from traditional to non-traditional threats to the national security, talks about the hybrid warfare also. After the presentation of this particular national security policy, that was also considered as the first comprehensive document ever presented in the history of Pakistan. Where do you see that progress in order after the conceptualization of this until the implementation of this particular policy?
Well, I think very briefly that was a very good effort. However, unfortunately, the implementation part is lacking on that policy, and I think that needs to be seriously taken. But I'd like to go back to the question of the constitution and law. In that, I think the previous panelist, I think from the Supreme Court, he made a mention of the defamation laws. I totally agree with him that our laws are one of the weakest in the world. And the defamation laws are related only to individuals. There is no mention of defamation against the Constitution. So there is a need, to revise that law, that constitutional provision, and I think the government can do that, and they must do that. Secondly, I think if the government of Punjab has taken, a very wise step in my view, to deter and to defend itself against digital terrorists, I think all other provinces must follow suit, and they should have their own provincial laws promulgated as soon as possible. If the federation, for some reason, cannot, now make the necessary amendment to the PACA ordinance, I think, or through a constitutional provision in the National Assembly, then I think the President of Pakistan needs to actually promulgate specific ordinances against digital terrorism. It has been done in the past. It has been done, abroad in many countries of the world. And I think it needs to be done in Pakistan as well. Lastly, I think when institutions have to defend themselves, then unfortunately, the means available with them in the form of lawyers, good lawyers, experienced lawyers, is not there. And that is a weak area. And you can see, that on the other side, those who are violating the laws of the country and who are misusing the constitutional provision on the subject, they are hiring the best lawyers, the most experienced lawyers in the country. And when they go to the courts, then, it's very difficult to face the other side who may actually not be that experienced. I think there needs to be laws made wherein institutions should be permitted to hire, these lawyers to defend themselves.
Right.
Special provision should be made.
Right, your point is well taken. But now we are joined by Dr. Syed Kaleem Imam, former IG Police and Security Analyst. Dr. Imam, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate that. Now, let's talk about the National Action Plan. The point number 5 talks about strict action against the literature, newspapers and magazines promoting hatred, extremism, sectarianism and intolerance. Point number 14 talks about the measures against abuse of internet and social media for terrorism. What can be done in order to counter digital terrorism? What could be the mechanism in order to deal with that threat to the national security?
Jawad, thank you very much for having me in your program. Thank you very much. Well, I've been listening to your conversation, and I would just very respectfully try to add up few thoughts over what you have said over here. How to counter digital terrorism? First, just remember that the digital terrorism is not such a commonly used word in the international discourse. Normally, the word cyber terrorism is used, and like you just read it from the section 10 of FICA, it's already present, and you can say vice versa. They are almost the same thing. How can you actually overcome this cyber terrorism or this new coined word, digital terrorism? Well, I have been saying that for what we are saying is that institutions, states, governments have to be very fair. Number one, they should let people say what they are saying. Number two, yes, if there's a fake news, there's law which is available over there. You have to give access to journalism and all journalists and all those people to report these matters. Within the same system, you will see people start defending you. You have to create a counter narrative, in fact, if you really want to do it. Legal framework is there. Yes, you need international cooperation, but public-private partnership is very important. You have to involve community into it. They will only buy what they see, and you need to build capacity, like one of the panelists was saying, and you have to take some technical measures, like the General Sahab was saying. But the content moderation and counter-narrative campaign, that's very important. We don't see that. When we see a fake or disinformed piece coming up, we also see that the response is like with another sort of a narrative which is not so truthful. So you only have to respond to the fake news through a truthful news, and you have to tell what is fair. And in the social context, you can build a scenario where you will see that people start, like you said, the string community or the people living on the margin, they will believe what you're saying if it's truthful.
Right, Dr. Imam, unfortunately, we're short of time. This is an important subject. There are a lot of aspects which are associated with it. I just want you to shed a bit of light, take your understanding regarding as the last point of the National Action Plan, point number 20, when we talk about revamping and reforming the criminal justice system. We talk about this PICA law, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act 2016. It also talks about, in section 50, it talks about the relation of this act with the other laws that include the PPC 1860, the Code of Criminal Procedure, also the Qanun-e-Shahadat and the Protection of Pakistan Act. When we talk about the enforcement mechanism or this revamping or reforming of the criminal justice system, perhaps you would have definitely heard Mr. Haris Azmat talking about the deterrence mechanism, enforcement mechanism being ineffective. How to make that one effective? What measures are required for that?
Well, Jawad, it's so unfortunate that in the National Action Plan, the most relevant and the most important agenda that was reforming the criminal justice system was last on the list. This is so unfortunate. Secondly, the government hardly did anything actually to reform or restructure or to bring about the actual changes on the ground. Thirdly, we see there are some tits and bits, judicial and police and administrative reforms, but we don't see a large-scale reforms. Why? Because there is no will and there is no actually dedication to overcome the actual challenges which are existing over there. Yes, laws are there. You need to build capacity, but you have to non-politicize the application of these laws. So if you run through the cases which come to the police and which goes to the judiciary, you will be surprised that the conviction rate is very low. And most of the time, it's used politically. Over the decades, this has been happening. And if you go through the ATA cases, you will be surprised. Pakistan doesn't have so much cases of terrorism, actual cases of terrorism, like the number of cases which are registered, which are in thousands. And in any other program, I would like to list those to you. I was amazed to analyze them, which I got them a couple of days ago. But criminal justice system reform should have been the first on the agenda. And for some reason, it is on the last. And still, we are not serious. We are looking for knee-jerk reactions. We are just responding to every news. We are just trying to be touchy on whatever is being said. Let that thing have its space. There is going to be an inward response to whatever is happening. But as far as enforcement of law is concerned, you need to ensure that now there's a prosecution branch in almost all the provinces. That has to be strengthened. Like one of the panelists said, they hire good advocates. So you hire a good advocate for prosecution branch also. So you also roll out resources. There are models available all around the world if you really want to bring a change. The question is, do you want to? That's the question.
So your point is well taken. One last quick comment regarding as to any sort of assistance when we talk about the social media or digital media platforms which are international. Lt.Gen. Raza Khan already talked about having their offices over here. Perhaps that could also help the authorities in Pakistan to address this particular threat. What's your closing comment regarding that, Dr. Imam?
Well, you see, when you see that there are fake narratives being propagated by social media, you need a multifaceted approach. And one of them would be like media literacy education, educate public. You have to tell them what is truth. As a student, I used to listen to BBC Urdu service in 1980s because the state was not giving me information what was happening in Karachi as I was a student. So you need to let them know what is happening. And then you need to give them the facts. And then you need to let them make a decision. Fact-checking and verification.
International digital media platforms, how helpful that could be in addressing this threat?
Again, the last part.
How important is the assistance from the international digital platforms?
That is important. And if the digital information platform is propagating fake news, the state, the sponsored government institutions must give clarification, must give counter narratives, must come up openly and debate, must come up and openly and give their point of view. You see, for every action, you don't need to take a very harsh action. Sometimes the news just lasts for a day or two. Even the good books, it doesn't last for more than 6 months. So if what is being said, you need to see how you can actually digest and ingress, and actually you can respond back, and you have to promote a credible sources at your own level. That is so important. And using reputable news sources.
Kaleem Imam, former IG Police Security Analyst, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. In the studio, we were joined by Dr. Shabana Fayyaz, Security Analyst. Dr. Shabana, thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. On Skype, we were honored to have been joined by Lt.Gen. Retired Raza Mohammad Khan, Senior Analyst. General Raza, thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.